My uncle walked into my office on a Monday morning in March and placed a document on my desk like he was doing me a favor. He was 54, silver-haired, wearing a jacket I recognized. It had been my father's. The document said that my father, currently in a rehabilitation facility, learning to walk again after his stroke, had signed over 70% of Mercer Logistics to my uncle, effective immediately. I was 26 years old. I had been running that company for 2 years. I looked at the document. Then I looked at my uncle. Then I said very quietly, "I'm going to need you to leave this office while I review this." He smiled, the smile of a man who has already decided how the story ends. He left, and I picked up my phone and called the one person I had hoped I would never need to call. "Welcome back. I'm Sophie. I'm 28. This is the story of the company my father built, the stroke that almost took him from us, the uncle who saw an opportunity in our worst moment, and the 2 years I had quietly spent making myself impossible to remove. If anyone has ever underestimated you because of your age, stay with me. This one's for you. Mercer Logistics was 28 years old when my father had his stroke. He had started it in the back of a rented warehouse with 2 vans, 1 employee, and a client list that fit on a single sheet of paper. By the time I graduated college in 2020, it had 34 employees, a fleet of 18 vehicles, and contracts with 4 mid-sized manufacturers in the region. My father was the company. He knew every driver by name. He knew every client's shipping schedule by memory. He answered his own phone. He had built it the way people build things when they have no safety net, carefully, personally, without ever quite believing it was going to last. I had grown up inside that company. Summers answering phones at 16, helping with invoicing at 18, writing my college application about supply chain logistics because it was the only world I had ever fully understood. When I graduated, there was never really a question about where I was going. I joined Mercer Logistics in June 2020 as operations coordinator, a title my father invented that basically meant I did whatever needed doing. I loved it, not because it was easy, because it was real. Every problem had consequences. Every good decision showed up in the numbers. I was 22 years old, and I was learning faster than I had learned anything in my life. My uncle Richard watched all of this from a distance. Richard was my father's younger brother. He had never worked in logistics a day in his life. He had tried 3 businesses, a restaurant, a print shop, a consulting firm, and none of them had lasted more than 4 years. He came to the office occasionally. He took my father to lunch. He called himself a silent advisor at family dinners, which made my father smile politely and change the subject. Richard had always wanted what my father had. He had spent 28 years watching my father build it. He just needed the right moment. My father had his stroke on a Tuesday in September 2022. He was 61. Healthy, we thought. The kind of healthy that is actually just busy. Too busy to notice warning signs, too committed to slow down. He collapsed in the warehouse. His logistics manager found him. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had been on the floor for 12 minutes. I was in the office when my phone rang. I drove to the hospital doing math in my head the whole way. Not about my father, not yet. Because if I let myself think about my father, I would fall apart, and falling apart was not something I could afford. I was thinking about the company, 12 employees on shift, 3 deliveries outstanding, a client call scheduled for 2 p.m. that my father was supposed to take. I took the call from the hospital parking lot. I did not tell the client what had happened. I told him my father was unavailable and I would personally handle the account. That was the first decision. There were 10,000 more after it. My father survived. The stroke was significant. It affected his speech and his right side. The doctor said recovery would take a year, possibly 2, possibly longer. He was conscious within 3 days. He could not speak clearly, but he could communicate. And the first thing he communicated, through my mother, through a notepad, was 3 words. Sophie runs it. I was 24 years old, and I was running a 34-person logistics company. I want to be honest about how that felt. It felt like standing at the edge of something very high and deciding not to look down. Because if you look down, you freeze. And if you freeze, 34 people don't get paid. So I didn't look down. I looked at the next problem, and then the next one, and then the one after that. The first week was the hardest. There was a senior manager named Gerald who had been with my father for 14 years. He was 51, experienced, good, and he did not think a 24-year-old who had been with the company 2 years should be making decisions he disagreed with. He made this known, not loudly, not once, but in the way experienced people make things known. A delayed response here, a meeting he didn't quite show up for there. I called him into my office on a Friday at 4 p.m. I said, "Gerald, I know this is strange. I know you've been here longer than I've been an adult. I'm not asking you to pretend that isn't true. I'm asking you to help me not lose what my father spent 28 years building. And I'm asking you to tell me directly when you think I'm wrong, not sideways." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father said the same thing to me in 1998, almost word for word." After that, Gerald was the best ally I had. Here is what I did in the 2 years my father was recovering. I kept every client, every single one. 2 tried to renegotiate contracts when they heard about my father. I flew to their offices personally, at 24, in a blazer I had bought the day before, and I sat across from men who had been in business longer than I had been alive, and I told them what Mercer Logistics was going to deliver. They stayed. I grew revenue by 31% in 18 months. I hired 2 new drivers. I negotiated a better rate on fuel contracts. I digitized the scheduling system my father had been running on spreadsheets. I made mistakes, real ones, costly ones. A routing error that cost us a client in Q1 2023. A hire that didn't work out. A contract I signed too quickly that I spent 6 months carefully getting out of. I owned every mistake in writing, documented what went wrong and what I did to fix it. Because I understood, even then, even at 24, that a paper trail of honest errors is better protection than pretending you don't make them. My father was improving. By mid-2023, he could walk with a cane. His speech was slower but clear. He came to the office twice. He sat in his chair and looked around and said, in his new, careful voice, "You didn't just hold it, Sophie. You grew it." It was the best thing anyone had ever said to me. 2 months later, my Uncle Richard walked in with the document. I read it 3 times while Richard waited in the hallway. It was a share transfer agreement, signed, supposedly, by my father. transferring 70% of Mercer Logistics to Richard Mercer in exchange for what the document called historical advisory services and family investment. Historical advisory services. My uncle had attended perhaps 8 company events in 28 years. He had given my father unsolicited opinions over lunch. He had borrowed money from my father twice, which I knew because I had seen the records. He had invested nothing. He had advised nothing. He had built nothing. And now he had a document, dated 6 weeks ago when my father was in his most difficult stretch of speech therapy, that said 70% of the company was his. I looked at the signature. My father signed with his left hand now, his right side still recovering. I had watched him practice for months. I knew exactly what his left-hand signature looked like. This was not it. I picked up my phone and I called our corporate attorney. Her name was Vivian Cho. She had handled Mercer Logistics documents since 2015. Vivian, I said, someone just handed me a share transfer agreement dated during my father's acute recovery period. I need you to look at it today. Send it now, she said. Vivian called me back in 40 minutes. She had 3 observations. First, the document's formatting did not match any template her firm had ever produced for Mercer Logistics. This was not a document she or any attorney she recognized had drafted. Second, the date of signing fell during a period when my father's medical records, which she requested I pull immediately, would show his documented cognitive and physical state. If that state was significantly impaired, the validity of any contract signed in that window was legally questionable. Third, and this was the one that mattered most. Sophie, Vivian said, your father updated the company's operating agreement in early 2022, before the stroke. Any share transfer above 15% requires a 2-party signature, owner, and a named co-signatory. The named co-signatory in that agreement is you. I went very still. This transfer, Vivian continued, even if your father's signature were valid, which I am not conceding, is void on its face because your signature is absent. Your uncle cannot acquire majority ownership of this company without your signature. He may not have known that. He definitely did not know that, I said, because I had been there when my father signed that operating agreement. I had been 23 years old, and my father had said, with his characteristic understatement, "This just means no one can give away what we built without both of us agreeing." He had done it quietly. He had done it on purpose. He had done it before the stroke, before any of this, because he was a man who understood that what you build needs to be protected before it needs protecting. He had named me. I asked Richard to come back the next morning. I told him I had reviewed the document and I had some questions. He arrived at 9 a.m. looking satisfied. He had brought a man I didn't recognize. His own lawyer, it turned out, a general practice attorney who handled mostly property transactions. Vivian was already in the conference room. I introduced everyone. I poured coffee. I sat down. And then I explained without raising my voice what Vivian had explained to me the day before. The operating agreement, the 2-signature requirement, my name as required co-signatory. Richard's lawyer had not seen the operating agreement. I could see it register in his face, the particular expression of a professional who has just realized their client did not give them the full picture. Richard said, that agreement can be challenged. It can be, Vivian said pleasantly. You would need to demonstrate that it was signed under duress or misrepresentation. We have the original notarized copy, the witness signatures, and I drafted it myself. You're welcome to try. Richard looked at me. I looked back at him. You were never going to get this company, Richard, I said. My father made sure of that before he ever got sick. He just didn't tell you. My father found out what had happened 2 days later. I told him myself, carefully, in the way you tell someone who is still healing something that might upset them. He listened with his new careful stillness. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, each word deliberate. The document. His signature. Not yours, I said. Vivian is certain. My father nodded slowly. He looked out the window of his rehabilitation room at the parking lot below. Then he said, I always knew Richard wanted it. I thought family was enough, that he would never. He stopped. He did, I said gently. My father looked at me then, and in his face I saw something I had not expected. Not anger, not grief, but something quieter, relief. You held it, he said. 2 years. You held it. I held it, I said. He reached out with his left hand, the one he had learned to write with, the one that had built the company and signed the agreement that protected it. And he held mine. We referred the matter to the authorities. A forensic handwriting examiner compared the signature on the transfer document to authenticated samples of my father's pre-stroke and post-stroke signatures. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signature was not consistent with either. Richard was charged with fraud and forgery. He did not go to trial. His attorney negotiated a plea, a felony reduced to a misdemeanor, restitution, community service, and a signed statement acknowledging the document was fraudulent. He has not contacted our family since. My father chose not to pursue the civil case for damages. He said, in his slow, careful way, that he did not want to spend his recovery in courtrooms fighting a man who was no longer worth his time. I understood. I would have chosen differently. But it was his company, his brother, his call. What I know is this. Richard came to that office believing he was walking into easy territory. A young woman, a sick father, a company with no one watching the locks. He did not know that the locks had been changed 2 years earlier, quietly, legally, permanently, with my name on them. He had picked the wrong company. He had picked the wrong daughter. My father returned to the office part-time in early 2024. He comes in 3 days a week. He sits in his chair. He answers his phone, slowly, clearly, with the particular patience of someone who has learned to take words one at a time. He still knows every driver by name. I am the CEO now. Officially, on paper, the way things that are true in practice eventually become true on documents too. We are 41 employees. Revenue grew another 22% last year. We just signed our largest single contract in company history. Gerald, my father's logistics manager, is still with us. He sends me articles about supply chain management, the way a mentor sends things to someone he has decided to invest in. I am 28 years old. When people find out how old I am and what I run, I sometimes see the flicker, the recalculation, the slight surprise. I let them recalculate. I am not in a hurry to make anyone comfortable. I built something. I protected something. I grew something. The age it happened at is the least interesting part of the story. My father said something to me recently that I keep coming back to. We were walking through the warehouse, him with his cane, me beside him, and he stopped at the spot where his logistics manager found him on that Tuesday in September. He stood there for a moment. Then he said, "I was afraid when I was lying there that everything I built was going to fall apart, that there was no one who knew it well enough to hold it." He looked at me. "I forgot you had been learning it your whole life." I didn't have anything to say to that. Sometimes the right answer is just to stand next to someone in the place where everything almost ended and let them see that it didn't. The company is 30 years old this year. We are having a celebration. All 41 employees, their families. My father will give a speech, slowly, carefully, every word chosen. I will stand next to him, and the company will keep going, because it was built to last, and because when someone tried to take it, the right person was already holding the door. If you have ever been underestimated, keep building. Build quietly. Build carefully. Put your name on the things that matter. You will need them. Leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe. See you in the next one.